Hi, my name's Cameron Knight. I'm here with you again today for another awesome vintage camera overview. Today we're going to look at something a little bit more common than some of the other things that I've done before. We've done the Spotmatic, which is pretty old before Pentax really became a big household name. We've also done the Zorky 4K, which is a little bit offbeat kind of Russian camera. The Raleigh 35, which was that compact German camera, kind of a touristy kind of camera. And today we're going to do something just kind of on the other side of things. This is kind of a well-renowned classic camera. They made it for over 20 years. Nikon produced it from 1980 all the way up till 2001. They made these cameras. You could buy them new all the way up until 2001 because people loved them so much. And unlike the other cameras that we've looked at, this is a professional camera. It's a camera that was designed for professional use in sports photography, photojournalism, which is how I know about it and why I enjoy it so much. It was a big press camera, and that's kind of just a little bit on the other end of the spectrum of what I've done before. So I just want to kind of preface it with that. I also want to apologize for not doing more of these and getting more out more quickly. Just a kind of thing that it's just kind of something I do on the side. So I'll try to get some more of these out on a more consistent basis. I know I have actually some subscribers now, so I feel a little bit beholden to get things out. So the very first thing we're going to do, like we have in our other things, is talk about the history of this camera. This is the third Nikon F camera. There was the F, the F2, and now the F3. The F1 or the F1 or the F and the F2 were giant cameras. They were so big. The F actually had a giant meter that you could put on top of it. We're going to kind of get to the interchangeability of the accessories on these F cameras in a minute, but huge, giant cameras. This was the first I consider like modern manual focus camera. It was also sort of the pinnacle of Nikon manual focus cameras. This being the F line, it was their top of the line single lens reflex camera line. The F1 and F2 obviously preceded this, so this took all the technology that they had in those cameras and put it into even more technology, added onto it, and made this camera. After this was the F4, which we're going to see in a minute. The F4 was an autofocus camera, so this was sort of the end of an era for Nikon. So this camera was introduced in 1980. It was around the time that things were starting to really shift in the camera world. It was competing against a lot of other high-end high-end SLRs. The Canon AE1 was around this era. The Olympus OM series was on its third or fourth iteration, and that was a high-end professional body that people like to use. Everyone had high-end SLRs out. So when we look at this, this sort of was in a high competition era, and also just was packed with technology. It had an electromagnetic shutter, which means that it wasn't a manual clockwork kind of shutter. It was controlled with a computer chip essentially and electronically powered, which some people liked, some people didn't. But it was just a great camera. It was also the first camera that was designed by Giorgetto Giugiaro. I'm probably butchering that pronunciation, but he was an Italian designer who started designing, had a long relationship with Nikon and designed a lot of their cameras. He introduced this iconic red stripe that you see on a lot of their camera bodies, all the way up to you see the black on red, just the red accents in today's cameras even. So that's kind of a cool, kind of like trivial note is that he kind of came up with this. You'll also notice on one of my favorite cameras, the Nikon L35AF, which is actually a point-and-shoot style camera that was introduced in just a few years after this, 1983. It also has that red stripe on it, so it kind of brought a little bit of continuity to their whole line. This designer did, so really cool. So first things first, I want to talk about lenses and the lens mount. You can see that I have mounted on here a 50 1.2 lens. This is like my dream SLR kit. So my Nikon F3, I love it to death. I shot with one of these when I was in high school all the way through most of college until I switched to an F100. They're just fantastic cameras. So I actually sold my F3 in college to get my F100, and a few years after I'd been working professionally, I decided to rebuy F3 and kit it out with my like dream lenses, which you'll see in a minute. So this is the F1.2, which is just an amazingly fast lens. There are varying versions of this, but it is an F-mount lens. And when we talk about F-mount, we're talking about more or less every single Nikon lens that was built for for an SLR. They all use the same mount, which is really, really cool. So you can use lenses that go way back, all the way into the probably the 50s and 60s, all the way up to modern lenses can be used on this camera, and the lenses that were built for this camera back in the day can be used on modern DSLRs even. I've used all these lenses on my D700. So the mount is extremely versatile, very, very cool that you can have these really old lenses on new cameras. The other big player in the SLR market, can you name it? Canon. Canon didn't do this. Canon switched their mount in, I believe, the late 80s, early 90s. They had what they called an FD mount, which was their manual focus mount. And when they started producing autofocus cameras, they switched to their EOS mount, which is EOS. All their cameras are EOS cameras. Their autofocus cameras were always labeled that. And so they switched their mount, which was a smart move on their part for a couple of reasons. Because of they were able to build it from the ground up. It was integrated and built for autofocus. So that's why Canon has always been reputed to be a little better in the autofocus arena than Nikon, because partly because they changed their mount and redesigned it. Nikon has always been tried and true to this mount, and this is part of the reason why people bought Nikon, is because they could always use their old lenses on new cameras. So they were forced to kind of push autofocus into this mount. The very newest, some of the very newest Nikon lenses are called AFS lenses. Those lenses don't really work with old cameras. So they're the first kind of generation of lenses that aren't really completely backwards compatible. But aside from that, most of their other modern lenses, all backwards compatible. And for the most part, with the exception of some really early, they're called non-AI lenses. Apart from some of those, they all work continuously forward, with the exception of some of the lower end digital bodies, like the I can't think of any off the top of my head, but like the D40 and some of those lenses don't really work well with the old lenses. I'm using to record this video, I'm using a Nikon D50-100, and while I can use these lenses on it, sort of, it does not like them. It doesn't like to meter correctly. The f-stops don't really work very well, so it's a kind of a, there's starting to be some difficulty using old lenses on new cameras, and started some difficulty using new lenses on old cameras. But for the most part, their top-end stuff, their high-end lenses, their high-end camera bodies, they all translate pretty flawlessly. So really cool aspect of the F-mount. It's just a really cool way to be able to use old lenses on new cameras. So now I want to talk about the interchangeability of and why this is really a system camera, unlike some of the other cameras that are out there. Like when you bought the K1000, the Pentax K1000, you were buying a system, but that system essentially meant you have some lenses you can pick from. The Nikon, especially in the F3, is really a system-based camera. There's a lot more than just lenses that you can interchange on this camera, and that's what I want to talk about now. First, we're going to flip the camera over. You can see here that this is the slot that you used to slide a piece of cardboard in to show your film speed, to remind you what your film speed was. This is on a lot of older cameras. All the old school people, especially when I was starting out, all the old school people had their picture of their girlfriend in the back here. Just a little bit of photojournalism trivia. We all put our girlfriends in the back here. I have my dog in the back here now because I didn't have a picture at the time when I got this camera to put my girlfriend in there. But just kind of a classic thing. You'll see if you were shooting as a photojournalist in the 80s and early 90s, you'd see a lot of this. But what I want to show you is the back. These backs were actually interchangeable. The way that you would do that is you would pop open the back. There's not film in there, thank God. And if you look right here, there's a little tiny knob, like a little push knob that you can actually take the back off. And there were different backs that you could put in. There were big backs that took roll film that you could shoot like 250 frames on as opposed to like a regular 36 exposure roll. There were backs that when you attached a motor drive, which I'll talk about in a minute, you could make it so the leader would stop. So when you rewound your film, it wouldn't rewind all the way into the canister. It would leave a leader out. There were all sorts of backs for this. Actually, there was even a digital back for this camera. The F3 is considered one of the first digital SLR cameras because Nikon and Kodak actually teamed up and created a digital back for this camera. It was terrible. It took really not very good pictures, but kind of cool. So that's the first thing that you could interchange. Really kind of interesting. I believe you could get a data back for it too, which basically meant you could put a date on your photos, which is no one likes that. But the main thing that was interchangeable was the prism viewfinder apparatus here. You notice that on this camera there's a very small HP. This camera, as it's configured right now, is considered the Nikon F3 HP. This was sold as a thing. Now, the interesting thing is you could buy an F3 camera and put an HP finder on it, and I'll take off this finder in a second and show you how that was done. And that's probably what was done in this case. I would like to believe that this was packaged as an F3 HP, but if you notice the wear on my Nikon and my HP, there's not a lot of it. It's pretty white and pretty great looking. If you look at the F3 here, pretty beat up. Now, this could be because your fingers go right there all the time, right on that logo. But it also leads me to believe that it might be a mismatched finder and body. Not a huge deal for me, but might be for someone who is really looking for a matching camera. The cool thing about the HP finder is that it's a high. HP stands for high point. And it meant a high eye point finder, meaning that the full image of the frame was viewable from further away in the back of the camera. I wear glasses, and this was specifically made for glasses wearers, so they could have their eye a little bit further away from the back of the camera, and they could still see the full image. The downside to this is that if you don't wear glasses, if you're right up on there, then the image will look a little bit smaller than it normally would. But I love the HP finder. It's just really, really cool. So let's go ahead and pop it off. There's a button here and a button here. You push both of those backward, and then the whole prism pops off. And you can get a regular F3 finder, which is a little bit more lower profile. You can also get a action finder, which was much bigger than this, but had like a giant. It's like what I would imagine scuba divers using, but it's was used for sports. I've actually never used one. I don't know how they work, but they look really cool. I would love to get my hands on one someday. The other thing that it has here is some integration for seeing the f-stop of the camera, which is kind of cool. The metering apparatus is in here. A bunch of other stuff is housed in these. If you flip it around to the back, you see that there's a little screw-on eyepiece thing that you can change out if you so wish. You can put diopters in there if you have vision issues and you want to change out the diopter. That's cool. You could also put a rubber-coated one on here. I should probably get one for my glasses so I don't scratch them up. But we're going to go through all the buttons later, just like I always do, but I just wanted to kind of show you some more interchangeability factors. If you flip up the camera here, you can see that the ground glass is right there, called a focusing screen in this case. These were also interchangeable. This is a standard one with a split image rangefinder in the middle surrounded by a microprism ring, and the rest of it's just kind of a matte. You could get gridded ones, you could get ones that were all microprism, you could get ones that had slanted rangefinder. You could get tons of different ones of these. I bet there were probably 30 different focusing screens that you could get, which is really cool and super interchangeable. You don't even need tools. You just put your fingernail in between the dark black surface and the light black surface, push forward and pop up. And you can see that the focusing screen pops right out. They're also labeled. This is called a K screen. You can see that red K right there. So if you do find these used or anything, you can identify what they are and match them up with the database of stuff that they have. So pretty cool. So you can just pop it back in there, you're good to go. You can also get in there and clean it, which is pretty handy. So to get this back on, you just do this. An old school trick that I learned when I was younger was that you could pop this off and shoot this camera upside down, which is really cool. So what you do is you would roughly scale focus a little bit, you know, for the distance that you wanted, and this worked especially well in crowds. And then you could pop this off and then flip the camera upside down and hold it above your head, and you could still frame your images correctly, which is really handy for those Hail Mary kind of imagers. You really didn't have this capability on a camera until they started introducing these tilting, articulating screens on digital cameras. So pretty cool little feature, especially for the run and gun photojournalist trying to get over tops of the crowds, over tops of people's heads to see big crowds and stuff. A really kind of cool feature. I wouldn't recommend doing that very often because this glass here is unprotected and it's important. So like just popping this off and throwing it in your pocket is kind of crazy considering how expensive these are to replace. So we've talked about the mount a little bit. We've talked about the interchangeability. There's a motor drive that goes on the bottom of this. It takes 8, I repeat, 8 AA batteries. I actually have one. It's just packed away right now, but it's a giant motor drive that straps onto the bottom. You can see that this unscrews right here, and there's a drive that goes through here to connect to the winding mechanism in the camera. Same for here. And this is just a guide kind of stud. A stud from the motor drive pops into here and kind of keeps it more stable. So it connects in 3 places really. And it's really cool. You could shoot, I think, 6 to 8 frames a second, depending on what kind of batteries you're using. You could use rechargeable batteries if you wanted to, that came with a charger and stuff. Those were relatively terrible by the time I got to them, because at the time when I was started shooting these, they weren't really making the rechargeable batteries anymore. And so I was finding old ones, and the battery technology just wasn't very good. So I suggest, if you do want to get the motor drive, which weighs an absolute ton, get the AA adapter. You can put rechargeable AA's in it. They may not recommend that, but you can put high-powered rechargeable AA's and get pretty fast frame rates out of the camera, and it sounds like journalism. Like, it's like the sound of photojournalism. This it's like a really cool sound. So pretty cool accessory on the bottom of the camera. So we've talked about interchangeability there, the interchangeable focus screens, and the lenses. I want to run you through my kit of lenses. Obviously, I can use my autofocus lenses on this. My set of lenses that I use for my Nikon D700, those lenses work on this camera fine. They all have aperture rings, so I can control the aperture. They're obviously manual focus and not autofocus, but really cool to be able to use my exact same lenses I use on my digital with it. And because the D700 is a full-frame camera, and this is obviously a full-frame camera, it's like using the same kind of thing, which is nice. That being said, I have a set of manual focus lenses that I really like to use with this camera, because frankly, I use this camera for different things than I use my D700 for. So the first lens you already have seen, that is the f1.2 50mm lens. I love a 50 for a standard lens. I use it all the time. I have a standard 50 for my digital kit that I use. They're just awesome. I love a 50. I think they're underrated. They're usually pretty inexpensive. This one wasn't, because it's an f1.2, but pretty cool lenses. I love the 50. The 1.2 is not for getting dreamy, bokeh-licious photos. I don't really care about how the texture of my out-of-focus areas of my pictures are. What I do care about is being able to shoot in low light when I absolutely have to. And that extra half a stop from f1.8 to f2, f1.2 sometimes really makes a difference. So I wanted to get the most speed I could out of a lens, and this was pretty much it for what I could afford. So a really cool 50mm lens. Really just one of my favorites. So my next lens is a wide angle, a 24mm Tokina 2.8. It is not a great lens. It will probably be upgraded someday to a Nikon 24 f2, but it's good for what it is. It's a little bit soft, a little bit distorty, but it's okay. these are the two lenses that I use to shoot. Well, the focal lengths are the lenses that I use to shoot in day-to-day work. So on my Nikon D700, I shoot a 50 and I shoot a 24. That's just how I work. I love prime lenses, and I just like working with them the way that they work. Just the zoom just doesn't work for me. So I shoot a 50, I shoot a 24 in my daily life. Both of my for my D700, I shoot a 51.8, and I shoot a Nikon 24-28, but it's an autofocus version, and I would like to get the 24 f2 manual focus lens eventually. So these are the two lenses that I use pretty much all the time. Quick note about Tokina. They are my favorite third-party lens provider. I just really think that it's solid work that they do. They've been making lenses for a long time. This is a pretty old lens, and it's and they still make lenses today. My first experience with them was a 28-70 2.8 fixed focal length, or fixed aperture lens, 2.8 constant throughout the whole zoom range. It was a great lens. Then later on I bought a 17mm 3.5 lens, and I used that on APS sensor Nikon, like a D100 is what I used it on, and it was a great prime lens. It was like the only wide-angle prime lens that I could find, and it was just an awesome lens. Even though it was 3.5, it was still really cool. It was a great lens. I still have shots in my portfolio that I shot with that 17. Really good stuff. So you've seen the 51.2, which is just a monster. You've seen the 24-28, probably not that impressive. And now you'll see the big crown jewel, the 85-1.4. This is my telephoto lens that I use for everything when I shoot this camera. It is a monster lens. I can't say enough about this lens. Again, I wanted the most speed I could. Yeah, it's a little soft wide open. Wah, wah. When you need the light, you need the light. And this is just the jam for that. It works so well. I mean, this is like less than, I believe it's like a half a stop maybe difference from the f1.2, so it's not even a full stop difference. I think it's just an awesome lens. I just can't say enough about this lens. It's a great lens. It's sharp, it's really contrasty. I just love everything about it. So that is my lens kit for this. Again, I like primes, so you got a 24 on the wide end, a 50 in the middle, and my big huge 85 on the end there. So really good stuff. This is one of my favorite kits to shoot with, a lot because of the lenses and stuff. So really cool. Get all of these out of the way. Now I want to talk about the future a little bit, like I do with all of my cameras. What happened after this? And what happened after this was the F4, predictably. This is a Nikon F4. It is a monster. It is much bigger than the Nikon F3. If I can get them both in frame, sort of. It is a autofocus camera. If you shoot with the DSLR today, if you picked up this camera, you would not be super confused. The cool thing about it is that they hadn't gone to menus yet. They hadn't gone to digital menus. So you have all of your shutter speeds are still on a knob. Unlike the F5, which has the LCD screen on the top here, like a modern camera does, this has knobs and stuff, which I just really like. So super solid camera. I might do a whole nother video about this camera because it's so great. Ken Rockwell actually calls this the best manual focus camera ever made because despite the fact that it's an autofocus camera, you can use all the old manual focus lenses on it, and it's badass. So it's just a really cool camera. It still has all of the manual stuff, knobs and buttons like we like it, like we retro folk like it. So it's a really solid camera. It has the removable viewfinder as well. It had interchangeable focusing screens. Just awesome. It's just a beast, and I absolutely love it. This also had a giant motor drive that you could strap on the bottom of it. That was incredible, and it's just a really cool camera. So if you have a chance to pick up an F4, pick up an F4. But I suggest picking up an F3 first, just because they are a little bit more classic, and maybe I would say probably a little more versatile than the F4 actually, just because the F4 is beefy. So pretty cool. After that, the F5 was introduced, which is what all of the first generation Nikon digital cameras were based on. They've sort of changed their design a little bit since then, but a lot of the digital cameras were based on the F5 design and kind of remain that way. The F100 was a sort of small-bodied camera that Nikon introduced before they went to digital. It was one of the last cameras they made before digital. There is an F6, which was actually introduced after digital cameras were like around, which was kind of strange. The F6 is awesome too, but it's a really specialized kind of strange piece of gear. But it's probably, with the exception of maybe the Leica cameras and maybe some of the Canon cameras, the F6 is probably the most advanced film camera ever made. Like, especially in the 35 kind of style format. When you talk about Hasselblads and stuff like that, then you're getting into maybe a little bit different world. But in terms of 35 millimeter, the F6, the great grandbaby of this camera is probably the best that there was. But like I was saying with the F100, a lot of the first digital cameras that Nikon made were based on the F100 as well. The D100 and all that lineage was kind of from the F100 style cameras, which were a little bit different than the D5. It wasn't, or the F5. They weren't designed exactly the same. So kind of cool. Kind of that's just the history and the lineage of these. They're great cameras. I can't say enough about it. So now we're going to do the bells and whistles, and then at the end I'm going to show you what it looks like through the viewfinder and talk about the kind of the fatal flaw of the F3 if there is one. So let's start at the front of the camera here. I'm going to go through all the buttons and dials. So on the front here, you have a PC flash sync port here. There is a cover that you can buy for these. Mine is gone, clearly. Strap lugs, lens release. If you're used to Canon cameras, Nikon cameras twist the other way. So you push this down and twist off, same as you would any other camera. But it twists this way as opposed to Canon cameras which twist the other way. So you have that. Over here, you have a dual purpose button. This is depth of field preview. It stops the lens down so you can see the depth of field. When you push this down and twist this, it locks the mirror up. Mirror lockup is used for long exposures, and that's about it, really, long exposures. I don't ever use mirror lockup, but it's nice to know it's there. And then you can twist it back. You don't have to push down. You just twist it back to let the mirror back down. This is another dual-purpose button. When you wind the camera on, which it appears to be wound on already, this is like the manual override button. When the battery dies in this camera, unlike some of the earlier Nikons that were the battery only powered the meter, the battery powers the shutter system in this camera. So if your battery dies, you can still use the camera, you can still advance the camera, and you can still shoot, but you have to shoot with this lever, and this gives you a fixed, I believe, 250th of a second shutter speed. Don't hold me to that. I don't remember if that's the exact right shutter speed or not. But yeah, that's what that's for. This camera was one of the first cameras with aperture priority. You can put it on A, and you choose the aperture, and the camera chooses the shutter speed for you. If you push the front of this button down, it's essentially AE lock. So you can point your camera at the correct exposure thing, push this button down when you're in aperture priority mode, push this button down and recompose, and it will lock the aperture in. So that's what that button is essentially an AE button. This camera does not have shutter speed priority or program or anything like that. It just has aperture priority and manual, essentially. So this is a red light that is used for the timer function, I believe. This is the advanced lever. It's not. I can't actually fire it right now because I don't have a battery in here. I took it out to save the battery contacts and everything. So this is the shutter button. It takes a standard threaded shutter release. This is the on switch, which is not very handy, but that's what it is. That's the on switch. That turns the meter on and everything. But I can shoot the camera using that override button that I talked about earlier. So you've got your crank there. You have a switch here, which is the self timer possibly. So you got your on switch here. This little lever here is a double exposure lever, so you can push this over. Let me fire the camera. Yep. And I can shoot a picture, and then I can crank it. I can push this over and crank it, and that gives me a double exposure, so it cocks the shutter without advancing the film. So that's what that does. You've got your shutter exposure or your frame counter here. Switch over to the other side, and you have your rewind. This is a bizarre hot shoe. You can buy flashes that were made specifically for this camera that use this weird hot shoe that goes over this rewind knob. But you can also buy adapters that adapt this weird hot shoe to a normal hot shoe. Probably one of the flaws of this camera, if I were to say there are any. There's a little switch right here that you push in, and that allows you to bring up the rewind knob to open the back. So you can't just pull up on it, you have to push that over and then pull up on it. You have another button here that you have to push in, and then you can rotate this to give you exposure compensation. It's not very handy. I believe this was maybe one of the first cameras with exposure compensation. I like that it's hard to use because I don't use exposure compensation and I don't want to accidentally knock it. So it's not very easy to use. I don't use it anyway, but it's there if you need it. On the back here, you lift this ring up. This was the same ring we turned to use our exposure compensation. You lift this up and twist it, and it changes your ISO for the meter in the camera, so you can indicate what film speed you're using and tell the camera that. On the back, there is essentially nothing except for this little switch. If you look carefully, you can see that the window of the camera turns red. That is a block for the eyepiece. Also used during long exposures. During long exposures, light can bleed in through the eyepiece of the camera, and this prevents that from happening, which is kind of interesting if you're doing long exposures. Let's switch to the bottom of the camera. Here, this unscrews so the motor drive can go in that I mentioned before. This is the battery compartment, standard tripod mount. Another attachment for the motor drive. This is the rewind button. So when you're going to rewind your film, you push this button in and then you can rewind it. It releases the tension on the advancing knob in here. And that is the little stud mount for the motor drive again. So I believe that's about it. There are no sides to this camera, so you essentially have all of the functions. So very quickly, I'm going to show you the through the viewfinder and explain a little bit of a situation that people have with the meter. So I'm actually going to put a battery in the camera for this so you can actually see the meter. So let me go ahead and do that quickly, and I'll show you, I'll jump back and you can see through the viewfinder of the camera. So I apologize if this section is going to be a little shaky, but I want to show you everything in the meter and I can't really set it up on a tripod to do it. So you can see the edges of the meter, or the edges of the viewfinder are really clear. There's not a lot going on there. But at the very top is where all the action happens. So you can see that little tiny LCD screen is the meter. When the plus minus sign is there, it means that you're exposing correctly. If you change the exposure, you can see that it just says, it'll just say minus or plus depending on which way you are exposing. The little M shows you that you're in manual mode and not aperture priority. And then you have a shutter speed display. You can see that your shutter speed is, my shutter speed is set at a 60th. This turns on with a half press of the button and turns off when you let it sit for a little bit. The other interesting thing is that you actually don't get the meter function until after like you crank the film past the first few frames. You can see that it turned off there. You can also see at the top there, that is a mirror that shows off the aperture settings on the lens. That's like a weird mirror box that just actually correlates to the lens itself. It doesn't actually have any numbers inside the body or anything. It's just an actual image of the lens. So that is what the viewfinder looks like. I'm going to jump back and show you a couple other functions that I haven't mentioned yet, and then we'll move on from there. And I want to talk about this meter a little bit. So just the last few things about the camera. I want to mention the batteries here. They take standard kind of watch size batteries. The batteries are known as 357 size right now, or LR44 is the kind of classic name for them. It takes two of them, and they just screw in there like you use a coin to unscrew that. About the meter, it's not easy to see, especially in the dark. It's really hard to see. There is a small button right here. It is a red button. You can shove it in really hard. It's not easy to press, but you can press this button and it gives a backlight to that LED in there. That I don't even think it works on my camera, and it doesn't work on a lot of cameras. So that's sort of a little bit of a flaw of the meter. It's not super easy to see, but it's very unobtrusive, which is the thing that I like about it. And you can shove that button in really hard to actually see it on the examples that it works on. I mentioned I didn't have the batteries in, so I couldn't test this while I was talking, but this knob here, this twisting thing here that I mentioned, you can twist it and it shows another red dot right there. That is the self-timer. I believe it's a 10 second self-timer. You can't change it that I know of. And the red light on the front is the blinking light to show you when the self-timer is going to go off. So I just wanted to verify those two things really quickly before I sign off. I really, really love the F3. Like I said, it's probably one of my favorite cameras. It has all the functionality you need and none of the things that you don't. It's just a really stunning example of what a camera can be. The reason I chose to do this camera is that they're actually announcing a new Nikon that's supposed to be coming out soon called it's just a rumor, but they are advertising things. They have these pure photography ads out right now that are supposed to be promoting this new retro style camera, and it's rumored to look like this. So that's why I wanted to do this video now, is because there's supposed to be a retro camera coming out that's supposed to look like this. No movie modes, it's supposedly, classic F mount, supposedly, full frame, supposedly. So it would be really cool if they were able to come out with something like that. So if you see one of these on your shelf on your camera store in the future, it probably won't be an F3, it'll probably be this new vintage camera. That's supposed to be the bomb. So that's just a rumor though, so we'll see what they actually come out with. So yeah, I think this is a really awesome camera. I would, like I said, so much so that I bought it twice. I want to mention briefly the cost of these cameras is coming down for the moment. I think that if they do announce a camera that looks like this, they'll probably see a spike in prices of the vintage versions of these. But they're easy to find. I believe they're around $250 to probably $400, depending on the quality of the example. These are professional cameras for professionals, so many of them are beat up, so be careful when you buy them. I always suggest going to KEH. They don't sponsor me, but I think they're awesome, and I always buy stuff from them. So the F3s, like I said, $250 to $400-ish. The lenses you can buy, there's so many different lenses for them. I always love starting out with 50, so you can get the 50-1.8 for $100. You can even buy the D version, which is the version that's still being made. Really good lenses. I love the manual focus 50-1.8 too. Those have all been really nice lenses for me. So if that's what you're into, if you really like this camera, expect to spend maybe $400 with a lens, maybe less if you hunt around a little bit. And like I said, the prices of these cameras are always coming down, so something to think about if you want to invest. So really sweet gear. I want to talk again, one last thing before I sign off here. I want to show you, and I'm going to zoom in here so you can really see it. I want to show you the shutter speed dial here really quick. So you can see that there's an A. That's for auto whatever. It's aperture priority mode. X is the sync speed. This camera is a weird problem with this camera is it doesn't sync above a 90th of a second from what I've been told. The red on the 60 there is apparently a sync speed indicator too, but I've heard the X is a 90th of a second. So if you're using flash, that's as fast as you can go, which is unfortunate, regardless of what kind of flash you're using. The T mode, I always like it more than bulb mode because you can shoot the camera and then you have to move this to turn it off, so you don't have to have a locking cable release, unlike the bulb mode, which is push and then release. So for long exposures, I like the T mode because you can click it and then leave it and then come back and close it. You have 8 seconds all the way to 2,000th of a second, which is pretty nice, pretty fast. The F4 goes all the way up to 8,000th, I believe, which is pretty sweet. So there's that on-off switch again. So just a couple details that I left out when I was going through the full overview. So there is your camera overview of the Nikon F3 HP. So I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments if there are some other cameras you would like me to overview or review. I don't like calling these reviews because all these cameras I own, and I like all of them. So they're overviews, not reviews for me. And that's about it. So let me know what you guys want to see next. I still have lots of cameras in the arsenal that you guys can get a detailed look at. That's the whole point of these, is to give you really in-depth looks at these cameras. So thanks for subscribing for those of you who have subscribed, and thanks for watching for those of you who have just watched this. I really hope to do some more of these soon. I will talk to you then, and keep shooting, guys.